I'm not the house of cards that falls down easily. I'm strong enough to handle what you throw at me.
Welcome to Mental Health News Radio. I'm your host, Kristin Sunanta Walker. Just what are we going to discuss? The intimacy that is mental health. Let's continue to make it as comfortable as discussing brain health or heart health. This show has been on the air for several years and we have amazing co-hosts. And then we created a network of podcasters on mentalhealthnewsradionetwork.com, a place where every possible facet of mental well-being can be talked about openly. My show, after several hundred interviews, the format is this: intimate, deep, funny, touching, sometimes uncomfortable, but always vulnerable conversations with interesting people. The goal is to have you, our listening family, many of you who have become my good friends, feel as though you are listening in on private conversations. Thank you for tuning in and becoming part of this amazing journey with me, and now with our network of podcasters. Just knowing this podcast might be helping any of you realize you are not alone on this journey called being a human being makes doing this podcast worth every second.
After all we promised, we'd be cordial.
Hey listeners, Kristin Sunanta Walker here. I am on with Aline Duriaud, which I just realized I have been pronouncing her name horribly forever, and she does our press releases for the network. So I'm so glad that I never actually said her name on air and had her go, what? Hello, Aline. How are you? From London.
Hello.
So you do the show. We'll tell our listeners what the name of your podcast is on the network.
Yes, so I do a podcast called Beyond the Borderline, and the sort of tagline is a hopeful and realistic look at life with BPD, which is Borderline Personality Disorder, which I am diagnosed with. And thanks to you offering me the space to do the podcast, I really wanted to do something, as the tagline suggests, that was kind of authentic, where I was talking about my struggles and the fact that recovery for me, and I think for a lot of people, is just not linear, and we have setbacks and we have struggles, but at the same time, to put the focus on, there are ways that you can manage this diagnosis, which is still very stigmatized, and you can live your life and sort of not feel like a freak and feel okay around people and feel okay about your life. And that's sort of that was really the premise. And although it's not formally a dialectical behavioral therapy focused podcast, I do talk about those skills quite a lot based on my own experience, because they're very bite-sized. You can do an episode about, oh, look, this is this particular skill that you can use for this. And I find that I really want to give people kind of practical suggestions. Obviously I'm coming from a peer perspective. I'm not a clinician.
Right.
And clearly a podcast can't be the solution for,
right.
for
it certainly
dealing with a complicated mental health diagnosis. But it's just a start. It's a way of just getting a little hook, like, oh, look, she's talking about this and I struggle with this and this is interesting. And do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, sorry, I'm adjusting, Joe, you'll have to edit this. I'm adjusting my camera so that this freaking light is not like blinding my ass. Oh, forget it. It's just going to do it. Sorry. Now I've messed it up. Damn it. Oh no, you're going to be,
I can still see you.
Sorry. You're going to have, I'm going to turn cameras off because I'm finding it distracting. And
okay, that's fine. That's fine. Go for it.
Okay. I'm like shaking my head at you, and I'm realizing that the listeners don't know that I'm shaking my head. Yes. Cause I don't, when it's just audio, you're relying on that. Just audio.
No worries.
Anyway. Okay. So how did you find how did we meet? How did we connect? I know this, but I kind of want the listeners to hear.
Yes, I will share that with you. So basically I remember this really clearly because I remember it. I was on my way to the gym and I was just looking for mental health podcasts. I'm a huge podcast fan. I, as you know, design jewelry and I usually have podcasts on in the background. So I love the medium anyway. And I happened upon an interview between you and, now I don't want to get her name wrong, Christine Louis de Canville.
Perfect.
Yeah. Okay, good. And I love I love your show. I particularly love your episodes with her.
I know. I want her to be a podcaster. I'm going to make her listen to this so that she hears me saying on the air,
she's amazing.
Have a podcast, Christine. Come on. Anyway, I'll do all the shows with you. Just do a podcast.
No, she's amazing. So I was listening, and the episode that I was listening to was about narcissistic mothers, and
I know that one well.
Narcissistic mothers. But actually, do you know, I started listening. I think I saw narcissistic, and I started listening because I just had a really, having a mental health condition. I'm also recovering from eating disorders and substance abuse. So I attend quite a few different kind of peer groups, and I'd had this really weird, I think now, obviously I'm not a clinician, but I think looking back now that the person was probably had some covert narcissism. And I had this really bizarre sort of intense emotional kind of affair or connection with this guy who was kind of like a mentor to me, and then he just cut me off really suddenly, and it was just, the whole thing was really awful and messy, and I was in quite a sort of bad headspace. And so I was using the gym, and I found this podcast. So I thought, oh, this might give me some insight into this situation that's happened, but it was actually about narcissistic mothers. And I just remember listening, and I was like, wait a minute. I was like, that's my mother. That's my mother. You know, I was like ticking off all the boxes. Bless her. So that was my first. So that's how I first started listening. But the reason I kept listening is because, you know, as someone who has this borderline personality diagnosis, I often, when I started looking up stuff on narcissism, what I would often find, I mean, I think maybe it's changing now, but I would sort of, let's say, find a blog post or find a YouTube video, and very often what I would see is the narcissist and the borderline. And
yes,
I would be looking at it, and I would be like, yeah, I get that borderline personality disorder has some really, you know, those symptoms are very challenging for people to deal with. I get that, but it was also quite kind of alienating.
Oh yeah.
And you know, because I thought they are different, and I don't see myself in the same way as like a malignant narcissist or a psychopath, even though I understand that, you know, people who have that are ill at some level. So I found all that really difficult to navigate. And what I really appreciated, I can't remember exactly when or how, but I reached out to you and was sort of saying, look, you know, this is my perspective. And I'm very appreciative that you sort of took that on. You know, you could have just gone, oh, no.
Or I could have gone, borderline, oh my God, blocker, you know, something
exactly
like that.
Oh,
I was like, oh, you were so sweet. You were so articulate as you are, which is why you are the chief in charge of all of our press releases. But
I love it. Yeah, I love it.
You gave me this perspective, and I went, oh, and I don't want anyone to feel horrible about themselves. I don't want narcissists to feel horrible about themselves.
No.
But I thought, okay, and I relate to a lot of the symptoms of borderline. I mean, if I had been diagnosed correctly years ago, maybe I would have had that diagnosis at some point. But I just thought, okay, I need to show this as a perspective, because I hear this, you know, all the time, borderline being shoved into the category of narcissism, and counselors saying, I'm not going to work with those people because they're, and I understand both sides, because sometimes it's horrible, but and we're going to get into this. Sometimes it's horrible what someone is dealing with someone that has been diagnosed with borderline. Not always, but sometimes it is. And in those cases, I think maybe they have the wrong diagnosis. Maybe they are someone with narcissistic personality disorder.
It could
that's
be
quite malicious, and I don't see that as necessarily a borderline thing. But you never know.
You don't know. And I think, I mean, I've had that experience actually. Because I, relative to a lot of people that I know in London, because the treatment I got, I mean, now I see a private therapist, but when I was first diagnosed, I was lucky enough to get quite an intensive treatment program through the National Health Service here in the UK. And it was essentially 1 year, like intensive, 3 days a week, full time, very strict boundaries. You know, if you, and it was full on, you know, there were people who were like wanting to throw chairs and screaming. It was not all the time at all, but it, you know, it could get quite hairy because people were in a great deal of distress. And so the boundaries had to be extremely strict, you know, and so I was very lucky to get that. And I think that being in a group setting and sort of having the safety in a sense of very qualified psychiatrists and therapists really made a difference. But subsequently to that, you know, when I was, after I finished that, I was looking for different therapists, and it's hard. It is very hard to find people who have the experience of working with BPD. And I remember I went to see one lady, and I had a consultation with her, and I thought we connected really well. And I'm very open, you know, I'm sort of open about my diagnosis and about what I was dealing with. And she contacted me, and I thought, wow, this is a go ahead, this is brilliant. And then she contacted me and she said, I'm really sorry, but I'm just not willing to work with you because of your diagnosis. And it wasn't even that I was in like extreme crisis or constantly suicidal or anything like that, but she just wasn't willing to do it. And although, I mean, I did feel quite rejected.
That happened to me too.
Yeah, and some of that is the BPD, but you know, some of it I think is just human if someone tells you they don't want to work with you. But in a way, I thought, well, at least she's telling me now. You know, she's honest enough to just say now, rather than, you know, 6 months down the line when we're working together, because that would be a mess. So yeah, I think I can only really speak from my experience, and I think there is a really lack of understanding, and you know, as far as I know, the kind of evidence-based therapy, it is dialectical behavioral therapy, but at least here in the UK, that's extremely expensive. And I know that it is available. It depends what part of the country you're in, but the fact is it's just not accessible to everyone. So in terms of the podcast on the network, you know, part of that was about me sharing, look, I've had help and I've had support, which some people don't get, but I've also had to sort of cobble together creatively a lot of different strategies to help myself. And it's not ideal, maybe, you know, in an ideal world I would have access to a full DBC program, but that's just not my situation. So I try and impress that upon people, that not in a spirit of, oh, you know, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, more, you know, yeah, I get that it's not fair, I get that you're dealing with very difficult stuff and a lot of distress, and at the same time, you know, if you don't have access to what you should have, there are resources that you can draw on. And I'm very passionate about peer support.
Well, I was telling you, I hadn't looked at your stats for your show. You've been doing it since February, and I just sat here right in front of you because we had the camera on, and my mouth hung open because the number of people that are listening is on, you know, it's in the top 98% that you have this many people for a show that's only been on for, you know, it'll be on for a full year as of February of 2020. So the fact that you have that many people, and you're all over the United States, and you're doing this from the UK, you're of course in the UK, but you're also in the Netherlands, you're in Australia, you're already in New Zealand. I mean, you're hitting, you know, and you're in a lot of other places, Cairo, Egypt. Let's see.
I'm delighted.
Auckland, New Zealand, Dublin, Ireland, Germany, Denmark. I mean, you're in places that people don't typically get for, you know, a couple of years in. So I'm so happy about this. I'm so happy about this, really.
Well, thank you for sharing that, because I actually, you know, as I said to you previously, I look at the stats, obviously I check, but I don't really have a gauge.
Right.
So I just looked at them and I thought, oh, well, great, you know, people are listening, but it's so nice to hear that those numbers are high. And I have, as I was saying to you, one of the things that's really nice is I've had quite a few people contact me and say, you know, I can't stand having this diagnosis and there's so much stigma, but I've listened to the show and it sort of helps me a little bit to get a handle on it, or at least to feel less horrible about it. And that's really huge for me.
Oh, absolutely. They're
so wonderful, you know.
I hear it all the time with all the shows I've done about narcissism. I hear it from therapists, and you know, and I remember I had somebody that no longer works with us, you know, say, oh, are you sure that you want Aline to do this? Because this is a former therapist. And they came with that stigma. And I was like,
Mhm.
okay, first of all, yes, I'm sure. And you haven't even met her. Like, you haven't even talked to her. You're doing
Yeah.
exactly
Yeah.
what we say, and that we shouldn't do on how many shows. So this is why you're saying that makes me want to work with her even more.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like,
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Because someone else might have gone, oh yeah, I see what you mean. And I understand. I mean, one of the things, I regarding DBT, because I found DBT. I was actually someone I know from a recovery group, from an addictions recovery group, who also had BPD, and that's kind of the magic, I think, of peer groups, is you meet people and you share resources. But she said to me, I don't know if you've heard of DBT, but look it up, and and I looked it up, and the way that I have been able to access it, and obviously this is not in a formal therapeutic setting, is there are some fantastic peer support DBT groups on Facebook, which I joined. And I've been a part of several of them for, I would say, a good 2 or 3 years, and they're very consistent and they're very based on recovery, but they're also very validating. And there are people in the groups who don't have BPD, the majority do, but there are also people who have family members or who are struggling with depression or eating disorders. So it's obviously it's applicable. Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting too, because you really, in the lovely way that you do it, you called me to task. And I say that in terms, it was the most lovely way to do that, because I was texting you on Facebook Messenger saying, well, maybe you don't have, because I was coming from the place of this stigma around borderline.
Right.
And I was saying to you, well, maybe you don't have it, surely you don't have this, and you're like, no, I really do have it. And because
I do.
I call myself out. I was like, I had this whole idea of what it was because of what I had heard. So.
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, it's funny now looking back, and before I tell you this anecdote, I'll preface it by saying I'm not suggesting that psychiatrists and therapists are always right, because they're not always right, obviously. So that's not what I'm suggesting. But I remember when I was in the treatment program, we would have a key worker, sort of someone we worked with one-on-one, and then every so often you would have a review. So it would be you and the psych, and there would be the key worker and I think one other person. And I remember sitting in that meeting and saying to the psychiatrist, I think you may have made a mistake. I don't think I've got borderline personality disorder. Sitting there saying, and genuinely, I was like, I think you've made a mistake. And the psychiatrist was like, no, Aline, you've got.
Can you give our listeners, I know, they know that you're not a therapist, but can you give the listeners sort of the criteria for that kind of a diagnosis?
Yes.
And keep in mind, listeners, experiencing horrific trauma, like being the daughter or son of a person with narcissistic personality disorder, can create borderline.
Absolutely.
So keep that in mind. But can you explain kind of?
Absolutely. So I don't have because there is different, I think it's either 7 or 9 criteria. So forgive me, I don't have them in front of me.
That's
so
okay.
This is going to be kind of an informal thing. And if I may, what I'll do is talk about those through the lens of my own experience, because it's a little easier to do that. But basically, so I, from a very young age, I struggled with eating disorders and anorexia, bulimia, binge eating, etc. And I've also struggled with substance abuse and very, very volatile, abusive relationships, usually with people who, looking back, I would say were, to the extreme end of the narcissistic scale. Very mean. It's just, I think, well, that's a whole other discussion. But one of the things I think about BPD and NPD is that in some ways there's a similar wound, maybe, and I'm saying this as a peer, again, not a clinician. And I think narcissists and people with BPD are very often attracted to each other, and it's absolutely disastrous in my experience anyway. So one of the main criterion is these very volatile relationships, promiscuity in quotes, but very unstable relationships. Another core aspect of BPD is having an unstable sense of self. So to give myself as an example, I would, when I was younger, I'd get really, oh, I'm going to do this now. This is going to be my life. You know, I'd sort of switch from one thing to the other, and it would be very sudden. Like, oh, I'm going to change my whole appearance because now I'm into this kind of music, or I'm into this person and they're my best friend. And, you know, it was very extreme kind of black and white. So that's another quite a key aspect in a BPD diagnosis, is that you kind of don't know what you like, or you don't know who you are. You'll hear a lot of people with BPD saying, I don't know who I am, and I don't know what I like. And one of the things that I started doing, or that was suggested to me, was I needed to start getting in touch with my emotions in order to figure out what I was actually feeling about things.
Right.
And if you're someone with BPD that's not treated, you know, as I've shared from my own experience, very often people will be self-harming, or eating disorders are very common, or substance abuse. So there'll be a lot of self-medication. And then the other kind of very common thing, and I think it's one of the sort of symptoms that's most well known, is the suicidality, is the sort of suicidal ideation and the sense of being rejected, you know, feeling rejected. And for me, it is really confounding, because it's like, you know, oh wow, I'm speaking to someone and they've said this or looked at me in a certain way, and now I feel devastated and I want to kill myself. And of course that sounds completely irrational. And, you know, and then on top of it, if you're kind of trying to tell people, you know, look, I'm really struggling with this, and then they go, what's wrong with you? They, you know, it doesn't make much sense. So it all kind of adds to this sense of feeling invalidated.
Right.
I don't
isn't
know if
it
that makes
emotions kind of off the Richter scale too? Like your
yeah,
emotions.
yeah.
Go.
And I, you know, yeah, and I've heard it described. The woman who, Marsha Linehan, who I believe sort of developed BPD, I think it's her who said that she uses this analogy of people with BPD, emotionally speaking, are like people with third-degree burns. They're very, very sort of sensitive, I don't like to say oversensitive, but they're particularly sensitive emotionally. And so I suppose if you think about, you know, imagine you have 3-degree burns on your body, you go outside but no one else can see that you've got those burns, and so the slightest, you know, breeze
or
brings you into agony, but no one else can see it, so they're like, what's wrong with you? So it's that kind of analogy. And I think one of the key aspects for me, and from what I understand from most people with BPD, and I think in general with mental health recovery, is you have to start building resilience.
Yeah. What about,
you know, you have to start, and one of the things, you know, for example, I really struggle with criticism. It's something I'm learning how to, when I say struggle, I mean to listen to it as a separate person to the person who's giving me the criticism, filter it, go, okay, I hear you. Yep. I can take that on board. That I don't, that's you know, so that's something like that. Like that's been a whole journey for me.
That's another reason why we work well together, because how much micromanaging do you get from me ever?
I know, you're amazing.
I just don't.
You're so amazing. I know.
No, I don't know that that's amazing. I just don't do that. I'm like, you're an adult. You have these skills. You'll do the job you're going to do. And if there's an error in it and I ever find out about it because I ain't paying attention, then there's an error. Big deal. This is a mental health show. Like, if we can't have errors, I don't know what can.
No, I really, Kristin, believe me, don't think I haven't noticed that, because I've worked for people who really do micromanage. And
and deal with that.
But with everyone. And I have absolutely noticed that. And I'm like, it's so refreshing, because I can take accountability. You know, if there's an issue or if I'm aware of it, I'm not at a place where I'm like, oh my God, I can't say anything and I've got to hide. And it's not like that.
No.
So
No,
I really appreciate that. I really appreciate
no
that.
worries. I know that no matter what, it doesn't matter. You are always going to need to reset your password on the server. And all it does.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I know.
What's funny though, is that I don't care. And it makes me giggle, because I'm like, yeah,
I'm glad it makes you giggle. I'm glad it makes you giggle, because seriously, the number of times, and the poor guy, he's so sweet.
But
Dan.
He's so like me that way. I'm sure that I have driven him absolutely crazy. I've worked with him for like, I don't know, 10 or 11 years. And the fact that he's still, only because I send him so much business, is he still put up with me.
He'll deal with it. No, he's so sweet. He's so sweet, because I've contacted him. I remember he set it, and then I literally, something happened, and like the next day I was like, oh, so sorry. Can you reset it?
He will never. The only person that will punish themselves over something like that would be you, because it ain't going to come from me, and it's not going to come from Dan, because we just are like, whatever. And I giggle about it now, because
I'm so glad.
That's the great. I mean, you know, when you've been through so much stuff, you just, you really get to that point where you're like,
it's not a huge deal.
No, it's just, there are so many other things to be upset about, you know, than something like that. I mean, God.
And that's a really wise approach. I mean, that, to me, that seems like a really wise approach. And yeah, no, I really appreciate it. Absolutely. I love doing the press releases for the show. And but yeah, no, so I mean, those are some of the I mean, obviously anyone can Google, you know, just use Google and you'll get a list of the sort of the criteria. I don't know, I think they're probably pretty similar in the US and the UK. I mean, in the UK now, the term is actually, and I can't stand it, emotionally unstable personality disorder.
Right.
And because it just sounds so awful. So I just say I prefer BPD.
Well, you know, there's that. And I always think about this too. Look at all, you know, listeners listening, especially you counselors that are listening. And I'm not denying horrible experiences you might have had with someone that came in diagnosed, absolutely. You know, I mean, that's what it is. But how many people go to the lengths that you have to get help? And what personality disorder is notorious for absolutely thinking that they don't need help and they don't find the halls of counseling? Narcissists, right?
I know.
So it's like, it's not the same category by any stretch of the imagination. It just
no, I don't think so. And you know, funnily enough, and obviously I'll just speak very generally just for anonymity's sake, but I work at part-time at a day centre, a women's day centre in London, and I initially actually started teaching jewelry making there, and then I've been hired on to do some of their marketing and their admin. So they have women coming in, and some of them have mental health issues, some of them do and may not be aware of them, but to some degree it's women looking for a safe space and a kind of chilled out space. And there was a woman there today I was talking to, and she said, I recognized all the hallmarks of BPD, but again, I'm not a clinician, but she did say to me, I had a long chat with her, and she was saying, you know, I'm trying to get help. And Kristin, if you could have heard the list of things that she said, I've got 2 children, I've done the best I can, I've raised them, one of them's going to college, I've gone to this service, I've gone to that service. That's very common in people with BPD, is that they're you know, I'm going to try this, I'm going to try this, I'm going to try this, I have to wait, I'm going to try this.
You will not hear a narcissist
no, you don't.
Ever.
I certainly haven't. I certainly haven't.
No,
so it is quite a different, and what I will say, and this is observational, is that, you know, I've met people who I've understood from what they've said to have BPD, and I'm like, you kind of seem to have like, I mean, I think it's possible for people to have comorbid personality disorders. Yeah. So, you know, there are people out there who are narcissistic and have BPD too. Right. So I think it really depends. And, you know, one of the things I found out recently is that I was actually diagnosed, and I think the reason that I was able to get this information is because the BPD symptoms are more under control. I was actually recently diagnosed, or one psychiatrist said to me, you've got bipolar 2. The other one said, you're on the spectrum, but I'm not going to give you an official diagnosis. So as he said to me, you know, they're so mixed, there are so many different, it's so sort of on a spectrum. You know, and I mean, I absolutely, when I got the BPD diagnosis, I was like, yes, this is me. I know that this is me. And in a way, I was a bit naive, because I was like, okay, I've got it, let's tackle it now, we'll go from A to Z. And, you know, obviously it doesn't work like that.
Right. Exactly. Sometimes you just need life and time and age.
Exactly.
I mean, to get, because I can look at the ways I was now I'm going to be 50. So I know you're sick, every listeners are sick of hearing me say, I'm going to be 50. It's like, we've heard it already. But anyway, I'm saying it for my own darn self. Anyway, where I can look back and go, oh, and I can see from what you were explaining, why I probably wasn't ever diagnosed with it. Although I did have a lot of the symptoms that you're talking about, but the sense of self, I have always had that. I don't know why, because boy, I didn't grow up in a family where people had that, but boy, did I always have that for whatever reason. And I think that's probably because I did get the bipolar 2 diagnosis.
Got you. Yeah.
But I tried lithium and all these other mood stabilizers, and they just never worked. And just being on an SSRI worked, and that's supposed to trigger you right into bipolar, and that never did that for me. So, you know, you figure these things out. I mean, at the end of the day, for you, for me, for anyone else with BPD and with BPD and without it, but some symptoms of it, it's trauma is the
absolutely.
thing. That's what we share, is trauma.
Absolutely. And I remember, you know, everything, because I've been to rehab, but this was before I was diagnosed. So my mental health issues were not caught. And as a result, it was really difficult for me to take advantage of what was on offer there. But I've been to rehab. I've seen many different therapists. And because I was constantly looking, I was constantly like, I'm in so much pain. Like there's something wrong here. I'm doing all these things that I'm supposed to be doing.
And
my life
burns.
is just,
yeah.
And it's like, it's getting
third degree emotional burns. Yeah,
exactly. So, but one thing I can say is that two things. One thing is that every single mental health professional that I have seen has said, stay away from your mother.
Yes, I
hope to God she's not listening. She won't listen to this.
I know. So my mom doesn't listen anymore either. But I mean, I have asked people that, you know us both, and I've said, you know, am I not being forgiving enough or whatever? And they're like, I really think that you should think about how well your life is going, and do you want to muck with it?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
No, I don't.
Absolutely. And I get, again, everyone has different situations. I mean, and my father actually passed away 6 months ago, which has been a whole other thing, but I am with very, very strict boundaries and that I discuss with my therapist. I am in touch with my mother to a degree. Hopefully that's gonna, you know, I'm going through a kind of process of like reeling myself back in, because if I'm too obvious about reeling myself back in, then that creates a whole drama. So there's all that going on. But I mean, I would say that, so that was one thing that was really a wake-up call to me. And then I think in particular, when I was in the treatment program at Guy's Hospital, you know, it was really the first time when I'm not saying that I was in some complete denial going, oh no, my family's great. I mean, I think that had been cracked, but it was the first time that I was really confronted by professionals going, you know, it's understandable that you're acting this way and that you're experiencing this because going back to your family history.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm not saying, I'm very aware that this is not about blaming people or making every single thing kind of go back to like ground zero, my family. I know it's very complicated. Mental health is very complicated, emotional health, but I know for me that's been a really key part of the equation, is to have someone who knows what they're talking about say, actually, this makes sense. It does make sense. It's not just you're some bizarre person. You know, it makes a lot of sense, and you're not alone either. There are a lot of people who react like this, you know.
And it's interesting too, because I thought about this in terms of like soul work. I thought, okay, I said this about my mom the other day. You know, my mom is an exceedingly tortured person. She tortures herself. She tortures others. She tries to, you know, she does go to therapy. It hasn't seemed to go anywhere, or the scale of it going anywhere for her is at such a slow pace in comparison to maybe somebody else in our family or me.
Yeah.
And I'm not, I'm not grading it, because we all have whatever we're supposed to do when we're here. But I think for me, and it sounds like the same thing for you, because of this just grasping need to get help, be well. I mean, not everybody does that the way that we do, like we are out there
No.
eating it like it's ice cream. Can you help? Okay, let's try this
Yeah.
one and this one. And I think, it's because I don't want to carry this forward. I want this to stop. I want this generation, my generation, to be the end of this tortured woman syndrome.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I, I feel really sad listening to you, because I one of the things, certainly with my mother, and I've heard you talk about it with different guests on your show, that whole sort of notion of the empath. And, one of the things, and I don't know to what degree, for me personally, that sort of empathetic aspect. I mean, when I was in this treatment program, they said to me, you're extremely, they said you're over empathetic to a degree. They're like, they are actually like, it's a big problem. It's not.
I've heard that too.
In the sense, I think what they meant is, you're sort of relating to people from this sort of, it's fine to feel like that, but not to actually base your interactions on that. Because you're just laying yourself open to be completely gutted, basically.
Yes.
And I think that, for me, that's why I feel sad when I think about my mother, and I think about sort of different people that I've had different kinds of relationships with, is there is that desire to, I really want to help, I really want to be there for you, but obviously it cannot be at the expense of my own sanity and my own balance and well-being.
Right.
And I think, one of the things that I've discovered, and, maybe for other people, this is just like par for the course, but for me, it's something that I really discovered. And I was like, oh my God, I've ended relationships, or I've decided, right, this is just not good for my health. And it is, and I also feel sad about it, and coming from that really black and white BPD place of, I love you, no, I hate you. And, it's a real discovery to go, I can do this, and I can feel this, and I can feel this. I can feel relief that actually I'm ending this situation, and I've made this decision, which is for my own self-preservation and my own self-esteem. And I can also feel sad. I can also feel alone. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
And that's,
totally.
For me, that's a big part of managing, particularly for managing BPD, is like learning that two things can be true at once,
Right, exactly.
It's like,
yes. Totally. I know. And I want you to talk about splitting. Tell.
Yes.
I want to make sure we get to that. What is that?
So, and again, I'm coming from a peer perspective here, so I'm going to explain in my experience. And I will just backtrack and say that those are the episodes I've done on splitting are the really popular on the podcast. Those are the ones that people really respond to. So my understanding of splitting is certainly with someone who has BPD, is that it's, for someone who has BPD, it's very difficult to hold. So for example, I might have a relationship with you, and you might say something that I might not agree with, okay, which is just part of human relations.
Right.
And as far as I'm concerned, the kind of the sane response would be, well, yeah, I really like Kristin and I respect her, and she said this thing I don't agree with.
Right.
But we can still have a relationship, that's part of healthy human interactions. With BPD, with the splitting, it's, you can't hold those two positions. So I love you, you're the best thing in my life, oh my God, Kristin, you're so amazing, and you're fantastic, and then you say something, oh my God, I can't believe it, well, right, I was right
done
all
with
along.
her. Yeah,
it's that, and it what it can do is it can really create behavior where, so one of the things I've learned with splitting is I've learned to recognize when I'm starting to do it, because I do it with friends of mine. I have the most wonderful lady who I'm seeing on Monday, who's a mindfulness teacher, and she has 2 dogs, and she's the most lovely person. but you know, she'll say something and then I rat and I'm like, oh boy, here we go.
I mean,
Here come those
yeah.
thoughts again, thinking that, you know, this friend of mine, we're over that, you know. So the first thing I've learned is to recognize those thoughts and not to act on them,
Which is
because
so freaking
yes,
hard. That is why things like mindfulness, that's why DBT is so good too, the dialectical behavior therapy.
yes,
But it's also things like mindfulness, which I know that's thrown around. Mindfulness, but no, really, I have to do this too. Like I have a neighbor, as an example, who is very nice and cordial. And when I get in a depressive state, like, you know, getting towards the winter time, which I did this year too,
mm-hmm.
same thing. I'm out of it. I'm on the other side of it now. But at the beginning of it, I go into this mode of paranoia where I think everybody is thinking bad things of me. That's part of
Right.
and they're saying something. And so my lens is colored through this gray, just,
Yeah.
you know, yeah. And so he did something that was just, you know, very insensitive. It was very insensitive about my dogs.
Yeah.
And I immediately go into, oh, he's really this asshole. And he's been saying this all along. And I have to train my mind and my brain and use mindfulness to go, okay, he could have been having a bad day. You know, you're depressed right now. So I see what you're saying, where, you know, you have to pull yourself out of yourself and talk to yourself as your own therapist and go, right now. And luckily, you know, I have people like Michael, who's known me forever, my ex-husband, will go, Chris, you know, you really are, like, how many days have you been sitting on the couch, babe? Like you're
yeah, that's important. No, it's really important. It's really important. And thank you so much for sharing that, because it's all on a spectrum, you know.
Yes.
And I'm not saying, I mean, I'll give you an example. Like you've just shared an example with me. Like I'll give you an example. The job where I'm working at the moment, the woman I work for, she mispronounces my name all the time. And so, I mean, there have been days where I've been like, I've had it with this. I'm walking out of this job. I've had it.
What does she say? Your last name wrong or your first name?
My first name. She pronounces my. I mean, it's also because English is not her first language, so it could also be that.
Am I saying it right, Aline?
No, you're saying it perfectly.
Okay,
Don't worry.
See, I'm like going into. Oh
no, not at all. No. She routinely mispronounces it, and so as an example, like the sort of splitting thing would either be for me to go, oh God, I'm walking out of the job, she disrespects me, and then to layer all kinds of stuff from the past onto this present interaction that might not be there. That's another aspect, is for me, is like learning, actually, this is, I'm feeling intensity to a degree that does not actually match the situation here.
Yes.
So it's not that I'm denying what I'm feeling or I'm saying you're bad for feeling this, but it's just, I'm just observing that the intensity doesn't quite match the situation. Or, you know, the opposite extreme would go, oh my God, no, she's so wonderful, you know, to go to sort of the opposite extreme. Whereas, you know, a more kind of effective way of assessing the situation is to wait until I've calmed down and go, you know what, this isn't really my first choice for a job. It's what I'm doing now. She's not my first choice for a boss. It's what I'm doing now. Fine. I really like things. Do you know what I mean? So it's a bit more balanced.
Walking yourself. And I can't tell you how much it helps to have peers. I mean, there's so many times in my own healing through many, many things where, you know, Christine Louis de Cannonville, Andrea Schneider, and our other friend, Michelle Mallon, we send these
love the shows with them.
I know they're just amazing. And we've sent these epic emails back and forth that would kill us all if they ever got hacked into, not that anybody would care, but, you know, where, you know, Christine has said to me, okay, you're making these leaps. So I can tell that something's going on that isn't good, because the leap that you're making is it's like the Grand Canyon, or somewhere in Ireland, because clearly, you know, it can be related to where she lives, but, you know, some huge leap that just isn't. And what's been great for me is sometimes I would get triggered, like, oh, Christine thinks badly of me now, or Andrea thinks badly of me. But because we have this friendship, they have done the same thing when they've been triggered by a narcissist or whatever. I'll get these emails from them where Christine is like, and I'm like, okay, that's Christine doing those leaps, because that's what happens when you're triggered
Yeah,
in those kinds of
absolutely.
relationships. They send you back to
Absolutely,
your most
absolutely.
primal wound stuff. I mean, they just do.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I really love, I've heard you talk about these relationships and friendships that you have with Christine and Andrew and all the different people that you have in your show. And it's really wonderful. And I think that's so important to have a few people, even
Yes.
one or two people, you know, that you sort of
Yes.
trust to be able to reflect back to you. I mean, I had because I'm on Instagram in a way more than I would like to be, although it was quite addictive for me, but I do it for my business because I make jewelry. And I recently decided, look, if I'm going to do this, I need to do this, like do it
Right.
properly. So I've hired someone to do some coaching for me, etc., etc. And I recently had an interaction with someone, and it was really messy, and I was like really attracted to them, and blah 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 blah. And I have a good, well, yeah, I would say someone who's becoming a good friend, let's say, who I know through the sort of mental health voluntary circuit in London. And I met her and I was like, oh my God, you know, I was in that sort of like slightly breathy, like, oh my God,
Yes.
I know it's not healthy, but I've got to, you know,
Right.
sort of showing her a picture of this person. And she was like, in the kindest way, she was like, Aline, don't.
Yes. It's hard too when somebody does that and it would to not go right to shame. Like, have you ever had those?
I
Like, you
know.
you have
Yes.
that
Yes.
shame flush where you
Yes.
literally feel
Absolutely.
adrenaline
Absolutely.
dripping down from your
Absolutely.
head, your ears are itching, your face is hot, and it's the shame flush. I had it happen last night. I made a joke
Yeah.
to someone that was way off color because listen, we talk about serious shit on this network, and
Yes.
I need to go so silly and so
Yes.
off
It's
color in
important.
order to have, but I'm very careful who I do it with. So I told an off color joke to the wrong person who was like, I don't kind of find that stuff funny. And I had the full shame flush.
Right.
And I woke up in the morning and I you know how I handled it because this is someone I love. I handled it by texting him and saying, I told my friend the the joke that I told you, and she laughed her ass off, but she was in federal prison for 6 years. And we
Oh, right.
left it at that.
I like that story because it's very human. I mean, it's very human because we all say, yeah, I do relate to the shame thing. And for me in that particular moment, and luckily this lady that I'm friends with is very open about her own struggles, and she's very
Good.
non-judgmental, which probably helped. But I know my first, like, I was like, oh, here, I had this thought, and I just caught it, and it was like, oh well, she's just jealous, and it's like going into this big fantasy about, like, I'm going to be defiant and I'm not going to listen to her, but it helps to have people, and it wasn't like she was going, you can't do this, this is really bad. It was just
Right.
like,
Like
listen,
with the
this
Judge
is,
Judy
yeah,
finger.
no,
Yeah.
not at all, not at all. It was like, this is very gently like, look, this is what I see as a friend, this is what I'm observing, and I'm just kind of giving you my feedback, kind of thing.
Right.
So I think it is important, yeah, definitely, to have
It's
people like
just
that. And what I was, and
invaluable.
yeah, and I will just, and I'm kind of not quite sure how to articulate this in a way that connects to what you've just said, but in terms of being triggered, and this particular interaction I had on Instagram with this person, I don't know what their situation, I know that they have some mental health issues, I don't know whether they're narcissistic or not, or that's kind of the flavor I was getting, I could be wrong, but it's also, part of it is about going, it's not just about me blaming myself, because I barely know this person. They were sending me these really intense, oh, you're so precious to me, and it's like, we've had two like messages exchanged on
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
so yeah, I'm starting to feel all kind of like heady, and but it's not just me, it's not just that,
No.
oh well, I've got BPD, so I'm emotionally sort of all over the place. So it's kind of also about, for me, it's also about just trying to assess, like, actually, like, what, let's check the facts of what's actually going on
Yes.
here.
You know what's helped me so much with that is doing this and being somewhat of a public figure. I mean, in the most minuscule way possible, but being that somewhat, because I will have people that hear me on the show. And so they've made this whole projection of what it is that they think I am, which is somebody that I guess has their shit together. Sometimes some other people probably listen and go, oh my God, she needs to be hospitalized. But 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 somebody, you know, and then they, you know, and they will send me these things, and then they keep sending them, and they're longer and longer and longer. And I'm not putting that down. So any of you that have done that, please don't think I'm, you know, I'm just saying those are the kind of things that I go, okay, you know, enough of those have happened where I did dive in with somebody and then something didn't, you know, went awry because somebody was really unstable, and me too, for digging into it sometimes. But it's happened so many times now that now it's just it's instead of having to fight the wanting to dive in, I'm past that now. Now I'm just like, no, I just know how to kindly reel it back in, you know?
I think that's brilliant. And I aspire to get to that point. I mean, I'm getting there definitely. And it's so encouraging. That's why it's so important, you know, your show and the shows on the network, to kind of hear these messages being reinforced again. Because for me, I mean, another thing I think probably with bipolar, certainly with BPD, is, you know, another kind of classic hallmark is the sort of intensity. And I mean, in some ways, the intensity can be an asset because it makes you very creative, potentially. It makes you very you know, all that stuff can be good stuff. But one of the things that I've had to work very hard on, and I still, it's way better than it was, but I still kind of have to catch myself sometimes. It's that sort of impulse to over disclose and go into intensity with another person. And
I've done that my whole life until now. I don't do that at all anymore.
And the only people who, you know, if someone's meeting me in that place where they just want to go into that intensity with me, the only people who I've tended to find do that are people who have problems with narcissism, or people who have BPD, or both, you know, who have some sort of emotional disturbance. So for me, like the safest option is and it's been impressed upon me by different people, is, you know, my therapist included. Like I saw my therapist this week, and I was talking about just dating and the struggles and the relationship, and she was like, well, you can meet someone for a coffee, you know, like just for a coffee.
Therapist just done.
And I was like, saying, I know that rationally. Obviously I know that, and that's what I'm going to do. But it's not, you know, my impulse is like, I've met you now, like we're going to get married or something. So I'm being flippant. I get it.
I've done it with, I don't
mean.
Yes, I don't do it with romance at all anymore. I think I have learned that one.
It never ends well, I don't think.
No. And in business,
never say
I
never,
did it
but it
enough
hasn't for me.
Exactly. I did it enough in business this year. Like my therapist was like, just because somebody tells you that they can do this, that, and the other, and woos you from a business perspective and says they like you, doesn't mean you actually have to like go into business with them. So
yes, no, I totally get that. With me, it's the romance. It's the kind of romance or the friendship. It's the person sort of telling you, oh, it's amazing, and we can do this together, and we can do that together, and exactly. So one of the things, and the thing is that, you know, and again, I'll speak for myself rather than for generalists to speak for everyone else. But at the same time, I think that quite a few people certainly with BPD will probably relate to this, is that for me, when I stop going into that intensity, I have to then confront what's actually going on within me, you know, and very often that's quite unsettling. You know, if you've got BPD or any mental health condition, but let's say with BPD, you know, there's a kind of numbness, you know, if you can, as dissociating, or if you, do you know what I mean? You have to start dealing with that boredom, feeling bored, feeling irritated. God, and I think that's where the work is then, is to really start. Do you know what I mean?
Oh God, you can use them like you use food, drugs, alcohol, that intoxication of distraction, and you can do it by being addicted to relationships with people. I mean stopping and going, okay, I hear my dogs waking up, so this is going to go south quick because they're going to start yipping. So we will close the show because I hear the initial and that's going to turn into barking.
They're trying to get your attention.
Exactly. Okay. So I'll close the show. Aline, tell my listeners again, the name of your show and where they can find out more about you.
Okay, thank you so much, Kristin. So my show is called Beyond the Borderline. And of course, you can find it on Mental Health News Radio Network. You can also find it on all major podcast networks. So if you just go to your podcast network and put in Beyond the Borderline, you will find it, and it airs once a month. I also have a Twitter link on the podcast kind of header. So you're very welcome if you want to tweet me directly. If you have suggestions for show topics or anything like that, feel free to do that. If I may, I'll give a very quick plug for my jewelry, because although my jewelry has evolved, it kind of evolved as something I did therapeutically, and it started to become a small business. And although I don't explicitly talk about mental health on my social media for my jewelry, it is kind of going to become more of a feature. So that is on Instagram. The handle is Aline, as in Alien, ALIEN period hearts, plural, so HEARTS. And feel free to check that out. You can also contact me through there, but those are the two ways to reach me. And as I say, just to finish with the podcast, I'm very open to feedback. I can't respond to every DM, but I will do my best to.
Fantastic. So glad I get to know you as a friend, that I get to work with you, and that you're on this network. I really appreciate you.
Likewise, Kristin, huge respect to you. And I'm going to start gushing. So,
so we'll end scene.
All right. Fantastic.
All right. Thank you, Aline. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in to another episode of Mental Health News Radio.
Sometimes I'm passive aggressive, but never without good intentions. I heat up and act on my emotions.
Thanks so much for listening to Mental Health News Radio. Our podcast can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, and hundreds of other podcast apps, or you can visit our website at mentalhealthnewsradio.com. If you have a question or would like to be a guest, become a podcaster on our network, or join the amazing organizations that help keep us on the air, please email us at info@mhnrnetwork.com. Get ready for that special goodbye from our resident therapy dog, Miles, and a special thanks to Emily Sohn for letting us use her incredible song, Cordial, for our podcast music. Listen to the full song on SoundCloud at emily.sonne.
Don't be surprised when I don't hate on you. After all, we promised we'd be cordial. Sometimes in you I can fight it, but I'm opposing.
Good boy.